Greetings and Jumbo. Welcome to the third episode of The Insight Edge, a podcast by RSM. Today we have with us Dr. Bimal Kantaria. Dr. Bimal is the managing director of Elgan, a fourth generation agriculture and manufacturing business. But apart from running a very successful business, Bimal is also a leader in public policy, especially in the agricultural sector, and has been a key driver of forming SNET, which is the Agricultural Sector Network, which forms part of the Kenya Private Sector Alliance, KEPSA. And that is enabled bringing the entire agricultural ecosystem into one group. His recent development or contribution has been Elgan setting up the Kantaria Agricultural Technology and Innovation Center at the University of Nairobi, focused on developing agriculture and expertise around agriculture. Welcome, Bimal, to this, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Ashif. Thank you.
Bimal, you have a lot of expertise in the agricultural sector in all areas, including, supplying people, being in the sector, but also in the policy decision. Can you give us an overview of the agricultural sector in East Africa?
So, Ashif, thanks for inviting me. Obviously, as you know, agriculture is probably the largest single sector in the economy. Between 20 to 40%, depends how you do the valuation, is agriculture. Agriculture directly is the growing of agriculture, growing of plants, growing of crops is 20, whatever percent it is of GDP. But when you add in manufacturing, you add value processing, you add transport, you add finance into it, it's really the significant part of this economy. We estimate, between 35-40% of the economy, with everything else around it, is directly contributing towards agriculture. And of course, employment. In the rural community, 70-80% of our Kenyans are employed in agriculture. It's by far the single biggest sector in the economy. Of course, the problem has been that it's not growing as fast as it should, keeping up with the rest of the economy. Other sectors obviously growing much faster, IT and services. And there's a couple of reasons why there is a slight a problem with our Kenyan agriculture. One is that our soils are a bit depleted. As you know, only 16-17% of Kenya are actually arable. The rest of the country are not really agricultural conducive. So those 16-17% of the country has been overused. So we've overused inputs into it, and we're not able to replenish the nutrients in the soil. And I'll come to that in a minute, how we are changing it by improving the fertilizer usage. But so we have a problem with the depletion of the soils. The second problem is we have a demographic problem, of course, meaning that the youngsters don't want to stay in agriculture. They don't want to be in the farming per se like their parents or grandparents, but they want to stay in the agriculture ecosphere, meaning transportation, IT. So there's still a big scope in the value chain.
It's great you say that it's a big sector, but it's got its challenges, and we will explore some of these challenges. But before we go into it, tell us a bit about SNET and what it's going to be its impact. And are there other within the East African countries similar organizations that are working together to bring the entire agricultural ecosystem together?
So ASNET is a very novel idea, to be honest, in the whole business community. Over the last sort of 4, 5, 6 years, particularly when the past president Uhuru Kenyatta was in charge, as you remember, KEPSA and the president kept on having these presidential roundtable meetings. And in those meetings, every other sector was well organized. Banking had a banking association also. The problem with agriculture was that it's just vast. You have tea, which are massive, coffee, flowers, all these major sectors in it. So when the president went to call the private sector for agriculture, 20 different organizations turned up in the meeting. And President Kenyatta himself said, it's impossible to deal with something like that. So he reached out to KEPSA and said, you guys bring the sector together. And at that time, I was already part of the KEPSA Agriculture Board, right? And then we sat down with people like Lee Karuri, who are really instrumental in setting up ASNET. And we got hold of KAM, we got hold of Kenya National Chambers and KEPSA. And we said, why don't you just bring the whole agriculture sector together under one umbrella? And the momentum was there, was really good during COVID and just after COVID. And that's the creation of ASNET. It was created from the agriculture boards of all these three organizations. And what was interesting, Ashif, there was actually nobody talking about agriculture in a global sense. Everybody was just pushing their own agenda. And once we got onto this platform, people realized there was actually a vacuum, and ASNET was the right organization to fill it. But as you can imagine, these things are political. The tea people thought we were taking their space. Coffee people, floriculture, everybody thought we're taking their space. So from the very day one, we had two strategies. One is on our board, which is about 17, 18 board members. We said we'll take the leader of that sector onto the board. So nobody should be left behind. So all the chairs of the major BMOs are on my board. And then we created a number of subsectors. So we have a technical subcommittee, so all the technical people are on it. We've got a trustees group, which is 16 trustees who are very senior in the agriculture sector. And if I give you the names, the big people from Cooper, Kenya, and all these, Lipton's Tea and all these people, they're all on the trustees. We've got a youth group. And the objective of ASNET was don't leave anybody behind. So we've got such a huge amount of ecosystem in the agriculture sector. Then, of course, we brought in the development agencies, extremely important part of it. So if you look at our ASNET WhatsApp group, it's like 200 or 300 top leaders in this country in agriculture in various fields, manufacturing, transport, whatever. Development agencies are part of the ASNET ecosystem. And after, 2 or 3 or 4 years, we're beginning to find that people are beginning to accept ASNET. We're not taking anybody's space. We don't want anybody's development funding. We're quite cleverly managing the ecosystem. And lastly, Ashif, was more interesting was getting a government to accept the role of ASNET and the need for ASNET. But that was much quicker than we had thought, because bang in the middle of COVID, they reached out to somebody, please tell us how to move fertilizer from Mombasa to Nairobi or upcountry. How do you move flowers to... And ASNET was at the right time, at the right place. So if you remember, Minister Betty Maina was there, and all these big ministers, Matiangi, they immediately hooked on to ASNET, saying, great place, through them we can get our messages across. So that was really the genesis of ASNET.
And is this something equivalent in the other East African countries, or are they still facing the same challenges of a divided, diversified sector which is not integrated?
Yeah, it's a challenge. So a couple of years ago, we tried forming the East African Agriculture Association. Unfortunately, they're not as well organized as we are, and we found a lot of complications. So it's not an easy one. And secondly, to be perfectly fair, ASNET itself is so vast and complex. Just getting this thing coordinated is taking a great deal of our time.
Bimal, in terms of the value addition, when I look at the agricultural sector, you say 23%. Okay? But when I look at the employment in that sector, formal employment is just around 350,000 people, or the formal employment of Kenya, which is officially 3.5 million people. It's only about 10% informal employment. The second part is that the tax that is collected from the direct agriculture, not the value addition, is less than 3% of the total tax collection. What makes this sector so low in terms of its overall contribution to value addition, to tax, to employment?
Yeah, so you cleverly sideline the value addition in that one. So I'll tell you, there's a couple of reasons. One is a historic reason for low collection of tax. Over the last 50 years, agriculture, because of its significance to the economy, because of its just the nature of the country, it was always ring-fenced around. The taxation was always ring-fenced. So KRA and Treasury never taxed agriculture sector over the years. It was given a special preference. Only the last 2 or 3 or 4 years has the mindset changed in government to say we need to find places of taxation. And in the last 1 year, it's jumped. So every single now regulator, government is now looking at how to extract tax from this sector. So it was from day one, it was under-taxed and underrepresented. So that's one problem in it. The second, of course, it's a very much a rural enterprise who are obviously out of the tax bracket, right? You may consider maybe VAT and all that in indirect taxes, but the vast community in this country, 60-70% of the population still lives in the rural area, who are out of the tax bracket as it is. Your 3.5 million number that you just mentioned, it's tiny compared to the 60 million population. So already most of those people are outside the tax bracket, and I know KRA is looking at ways of bringing them in. So just the demographics of it is not conducive for higher taxation. Third one is, and I'm coming back to the point of value addition, but forget value addition, that's an easy one to talk about. But we calculated the whole ecosystem around agriculture, moving, for instance, transport. It's an easy one, moving produce from one place to the other. Everybody is paying tax in the system, but KRA or Treasury classifies that as transportation, classifies as banking. So one of our beefs with that 3% statistic is not it's only talking about people who are actually farming taxation. But if you include all the other parts of agriculture value chain, the number is massive. The second problem with that number, Ashif, is because if you look at bank financing, everybody talks that there's insufficient financing in agriculture, right, in this country. But we are again saying, Kenya Bankers Association also complain that the definition of agriculture finance and agriculture taxation too narrow. So surprisingly, we as a sector are saying, can you please include all the other sectors that agriculture is being financed, buying a truck, buying a computer, all that stuff is part of the larger, broader spectrum. And suddenly from 3%, it becomes massive, the amount of tax we're paying and the amount of finance going into that sector. It's one of the biggest sectors, but because all the other sectors are classified in their own sphere, the overall number is not coming correct.
The other challenge that I see with the agricultural sector is the low yields in the sector. And, you mentioned that, overuse of land, that's one. The second, critical part is the whole issue of succession and, continuously division of land. And third is the overuse of fertilizers and other inputs, without letting, the land recover. And this is a critical part if you really need to move it. What is the government doing in Kenya? And I see there are similar challenges in Uganda, Tanzania. What are the governments doing to move this needle forward so that, one, we can have more land, but also, there's better farming practices to increase the yields, of produce?
Yeah. So actually, to be fair, this government has been very successful in a couple of areas. One is the fertilizer subsidy program. Initially, the private sector was very hostile to the fertilizer program. But over the last 2 years, it's settled down, and NCPB are doing a good job in getting the fertilizer into every single part of the economy. But what was important in that was a transition from a single nutrient fertilizer to now multi-nutrient fertilizer. So to a layman, you may not know, but a single nutrient means traditionally this country used only 3 types of fertilizer. We use something called a DAP fertilizer, urea, and CN. There's a single nutrient fertilizers. In this government, when they started the fertilizer subsidy program, the first thing we told them is, let's not talk about the single nutrients, let's talk about NPK, which is a mixture of different nutrients in the same bag of fertilizer. So if you look at coffee, like a human body, it has a different needs of nutrients in it. So now we have a coffee fertilizer. Teas have got a very special fertilizer. Maize has got a very nutrient mixed fertilizer. So suddenly we're now giving the plants and the soils the right types of nutrients in it. And we're putting, and because our soils have been quite acidic over the years, because we're using single nutrient fertilizer, this type of fertilizer that they're buying locally from all our factories has got a lot of lime in it, a lot of gypsum, which is now, has got a lot of alkaline, which is now neutralizing the acidity in the soil. So if you look at what's happening in the last 1 year, 2 years, still early days, but the yields are going to jump. That's one. The second one, first is the technical part of getting the right nutrients in the soil. The second one is there's now much more availability of fertilizer across the country, which wasn't there before. A domestic farmer couldn't afford 5,000 or 6,000 shilling bag of fertilizer, but government has reduced it down to 2,500 shillings, which is much more affordable and available. So if you look at NCPB, it's all over the country. So it's much easier to get hold of a cheap, good quality, fully nutritious fertilizer for their soil. Third one, I already talked about, the land size decreasing. 17%, 16% of our country is arable. And unfortunately, that's the same land that developers love to build houses because it's maybe red soil or whatever. It's perfect for maize growing, but it's also perfect for developing a property. So that's where the big challenge is also coming in. If you look at all of Kiambu and all that, If you're a farmer, would you do maize farming or would you sell it for 10 million or 20 million shillings an acre? You'd rather sell your land and get on with it and get that money up front. So we have, that's an urbanization problem happening as well. So there's less and less land being available for agriculture. And the last and fourth one is important, is the seed quality. So in the last 20 or 30 years, we've been using only one or two types of seeds from Kenya Seed, particularly the 6 series. It's a highland variety. And it just wasn't enough innovation happening in the seed business. We can talk about other seeds as well. But the last 2 or 3 or 5 years, there's been a lot more innovation in seed technology. A lot more private companies have come into the sector. Government is now subsidizing seeds as well to a large extent and giving it to the farmers. And Kenya Seed themselves are innovating a little bit on the types of varieties of seeds, which are giving a better yield. If you use the same types of seeds for 20, 30 years, the same single nutrient fertilizer, definitely yields are going to stay where they are. But we're hoping with this new program, better seed quality, new innovative ideas, and a better nutrient mix in the fertilizer will hopefully increase the yields.
If I just drive that point a little bit forward, I see really 3 verticals to agriculture today. There is the floriculture, there is the horticulture, there's tea and coffee, and then the fourth one is really the carbs that we need.
Correct.
Okay? And to me, I see that, and then there's the sugar sector. And if I take each one, I see that there is enough input and development in the floriculture, horticultural sector, because they are private sector, large farms, and they are driving whatever is required. Tea, coffee, it's a mixed bag. They are the big players, and then there are the smaller players who have the challenge. And then the last one is really the staple food that we need, which is always in short supply. If you take all these 3, do you see a change in each one that will drive this, or is it just certain parts of it, that are moving and others are still stuck?
So the first one is easy. Floriculture, horticulture, driven purely by private sector, primarily export driven, extremely innovative. Ashif, if I tell you the stuff that's happening in that sector, the molecules we're using, safe molecules, less toxic. It's so smart. The innovation in that sector. It's driven by obviously multinationals, but it's a really in a world of its own, and mainly exporting. But it's very small. If you look at the floriculture sector, it's 3,000 hectares in this country. It's tiny. But look at the GDP output from it. Now, tea and coffee are more interesting. Now, tea and coffee historically have a political angle to it. We can go into it, but it was because of the politics. There was no more expansion of tea and coffee, and it was really a difficult crop maybe 20 years ago. Just after Kibaki came and things have started changing. And the second problem with tea and coffee, it's outdoor crops. So it's very much rain-fed agriculture, and there's weather patterns are very erratic. What is fascinating to hear, whilst, as I mentioned, the property costs in, let's say, central region are just too expensive to grow coffee, the last 2 years has been a phenomenal growth of coffee growing in Rift Valley, for instance. Land is cheap, plenty of land. And after some really simple trials, farmers realize they can grow coffee in lots of places like North Rift. It's fascinating. So we've got a massive expansion of new coffee growers are now in that area. A lot of the Kiambu coffee growers are now moved into that area. And government also very cleverly, county government, have also been giving out coffee seedlings to lots of places in there. So we estimate last year we had 50,000 tons of coffee being exported. It's compared to 125,000 tons, let's say, in the 60s. We estimate that in the next 2 to 3 years, maybe 4 years, because coffee takes 7 years to grow, that we will at least be 50, 60,000. Every year we estimate another 10,000 tons of expansion growing in coffee. Fascinating change in the picture, right? Again, driven by government, but also clever businessmen who have realized that at the moment coffee prices are at a peak. The coffee farmers this year have made a phenomenal amount of money compared to where they were maybe 2-3 years ago. Let's talk about sugar. Now, we can debate about the privatization and who would benefit and land was sold or not. If you ignore the politics of it, the best decision the government has done in the last 2 years is privatize the 4 or 5 sugar mills. And they were given, forget the politics, they were given to very smart businessmen, really clever people who understand the sugar sector. there's been a massive amount of expansion going on, and a massive amount of investment will now happen in the next 2 or 3 or 4 years. We're seeing it already. Yeah? We're seeing a massive amount of movement going on around sugarcane development, much more innovative new sugar cane seedlings are coming out. Bunch of movement because private sector's taken over. Secondly, we were very lucky, and God is with Kenya. Last 2 or 3 years, we've had plenty of rainfall. These two coupling things has meant that sugar, last year, we were probably self-sufficient. This year, we're self-sufficient. We don't need that much sugar imports. Forget the politics of it. We hopefully estimate next year, or at least by year after, we'll start exporting sugar from this country. A phenomenal turnaround in the sugar sector. Huh? Again, ignore the politics. I don't want to get into it. But if the whole thing works correctly and these guys are just left by themselves, the whole sugar sector, meaning not only the 4 or 5 mills, but Butalis of this world who are already owned by the private sector, they've all doubled their investment. It's been phenomenal change. Ashif, I'm praying if the rains stay where they are, the subsidy program is going into the sugar sector as well, and the private sector behave like they should. Hopefully in the next 1 or 2 years we'll be exporting sugar.
And what about the staples?
Staples is complicated because there's other factors at play. One is it's rain driven. So maize is a tough one because land size is going down, yields are going down, but weather patterns have been erratic. So, maize is up and down as usual. The one that we could be growing is wheat. Problem is countries like Ukraine, who are just phenomenal growers of wheat. If you look at Ukraine, they've got maybe 1 million acres at a time growing wheat. Just the economics of them growing one single product, we can never match it. They're so specialized in it. You go down to South America, specialized wheat growers, subsidized by government, huge acreages, and they only produce one product. So we just cannot, we cannot compete. The third big change that is happening with the staples is government is now leasing out land, their own land. They've got about 1.5 million acres of government-held land. ADC has got 500,000-600,000 acres. All these big parastatals are sitting on dormant land. So for the last 10 years, we've been pushing government to start leasing out these tracts of land, 1.5 million acres of land, to the private sector. Fortunately, if you go to Dongo, the project in Malindi, there's about 1 million acres there. About 500,000-600,000 acres are there, which are now leased out to 3 or 4 big players. And I was there a couple of months ago with CS Kagwe. It is phenomenal what is happening in that side. We don't talk about what's happening, but those 3 farms have seriously invested. Massive amount of money. One farm has invested 4 billion shillings in putting up a massive irrigation system and canals and all that. And in that area, the amazing situation is Kenya government has invested $250 million in a new dam coming out of Amboseli and going all the way into that whole area. The dam is about 60% done, 50-60% done. Hopefully in the next 2 years, that dam will be completed, which will provide water into that area. Then, God, willing, and private sector behaving and the whole thing working properly, that whole 1 million acres or whatever, 600,000-700,000 acres will have plenty of water, good quality soil because it's never been used before. That will be a game changer for us. Again, a lot of moving parts, but at least the government has really invested big bucks in it. And again, CS Kagwe was really a big proponent getting the money through. But that whole area is interesting because government realized we've got sitting on land. Why are we sitting on it? And private sector willing to invest. They were given 20, 30-year leases, guaranteed leases. So I think it's a good change. Again, lots of moving parts, but it looks positive.
I can't agree more. Looking at what this government has done in agriculture, and having personally worked with Kagwe when I was on the board of Telcom, a doer, a person who gets things done. Yes. And I think that whole focus on where, things are going, it's long term. People don't see the benefit. I don't think so. The government is beating enough of its own drums on some of these areas. And one of the reasons of this podcast was really to get that message to the people that there are opportunities here. It's not all doom and gloom that we see in social media, which when you read social media, that's all you hear. But there is some significant, improvements happening in some of the sectors you mentioned. But, the ESC have developed an industrialization policy for 2030, and they've got 2 key barometers. One is that manufacturing should be 25% of the total size of the economy. But the second one was 60% of our exports should be processed and, finished goods. And, agriculture would be a key component of that. Do you see that being possible in areas like, if you've got good coffee coming in, really packaging it to final products, or having some of the big players like Starbucks, coming and setting up the processing plants here rather than, taking raw coffee from here? Do you see that possibility, or are there challenges around the industrialization and really real value addition?
So there's a couple of big structural problems, and these are actually international structural problems. If you look at the coffee sector itself, I won't give you the specific names of big multinationals, but they dominate this industry of coffee. They're so powerful, Ashif, that in Kenya they were controlling the whole value chain in coffee. So the guy was controlling the farms, he was controlling distribution, he was controlling exports. The Kenyan farmer was getting messed up. I won't name them, but it was serious control from a multinational in the coffee sector. And if you remember, a year and a half ago, government came and just said, no more licenses. You can't control the three value chains in coffee, for instance. We're going to demolish it. All right, so we were really upset at that time because it was done overnight. There was no, and they did it too quickly, in my opinion, and they didn't consult as private sector. But it was a shock to the system. They got rid of the biggest multinational in the system, and he left the country. Now, it's beginning to bear fruit. Meaning if you're a grower, you're only given a license for the growing. If you're a marketer, at every stage you're given a separate license. One company can't dominate the whole group because everybody has to benefit, right? So it was a sort of a colonial hang-up. They had structured this coffee market in that way. By getting rid of these big multinationals from the system, again, debatable, but I think it's the best thing they've done, right? Because now coffee guys they can grow coffee and they can sell it to whoever they want. They cannot only sell to one company. It really shook the industry. It dismantled some really big corporate structures in the middle. Okay, a bit of a shock and awe tactic. Still there's some repercussions going through the system. But again, if government can just keep doing what they're doing in the reforms, I think it's going to be a very good way forward.
And similar things happening in tea in terms of the restructuring of that sector also is.
Yeah, and you can see like Tea Board. I mean, they've got they're getting from AFA, which was meant to be the umbrella body. They started separating all the main crops out of it, and having separate research stations, which they had in the 60s and the 70s. Again, I think AFA was done very quickly. Maybe they should have had more time into maturing it. But okay, now you can see Tea Board has got his own sector, coffee's got his own sector. Everybody's now got where they should have been, where they're specialized, regulated, they're specialized, thinking around that sector. And I think if these reforms carry on, it's very advantageous. But again, government has to stay the course. Don't deviate. Again, you're going to confuse all of us. Stay the course. Do what you're doing. These unbundling of some of these big institutions is good. And keep supporting the individual sectors. I think it's going to be very beneficial.
From a private sector perspective, what opportunities do you see in this for people who want to come in, in agriculture? Because it's a myth. Everybody says it's very difficult. It's very difficult to make money. There are all these challenges. People have burnt money. But then people who are successful have been extremely successful. What are these key attributes that, make you successful, and what are the opportunities that you see from an estate side?
So first of all, agriculture should never be considered as a pastime. All right. Second one, agriculture should never be seen as a mom and pop business, meaning a family business. Agriculture has become very sophisticated, Ashif. In this country and around the world, farm mechanization, AI, drones, the type of chemicals and fertilizers we're now using, it's become very sophisticated. Every square meter is measured. How much inputs and how much output is coming out from it. So if you're a serious player, growing in agriculture, it's very scientific. You've got to be an expert, and it's a full-time business. Don't joke with agriculture. It can bite. Meaning, if you're not careful, climate conditions are always varying. You've got to be on top of the game. And if you look at the serious growers in this country, some of the big farmers in Narok, Narok farmers, some of the big estates there, Each combined harvest is $1 million. Each combined harvest is $1 million is fully driven by GPS. There's not even need for an operator in that machine. The machine runs by itself using GPS in the whole 100,000 acres. It's that sophisticated. You go to flower growers, they check every minute. They've got drones, they've got AI running these farms, and then you can make the money. So there are, in the farming, it's a sophisticated business. You need investment, but the returns are there, right? I mean, you can imagine this year, the last 2 years, the floriculture sector has had the best years they've ever had per acreage, because they're really getting clever, and it's a world market. In the value chain, again, plenty of scope in the value chain, meaning transportation. There's no serious player of transportation in the country. There's no one transporter who can move goods around the country. There are some transporters who've got 200, 300 trucks. That's still potential for getting more people in there. The problem is it's seasonal. There's ups and downs, and so you got to have serious players in it. AI is very important. Drones. There's a lot of stuff happening. The new types of fertilizer I mentioned to you. The new types of agrochemicals I mentioned to you. The new types of seeds. This is really a serious business. And that's why I think some of the smaller farmers won't survive. How does a small farmer compete with Ukraine? You understand? This is a world game now. So there are international challenges, and there's of course domestic challenges that you've got to get serious in this business. A lot of Kenyans do telephone farming. They've got a job in Nairobi, and then they go in on the phone. They're telling their manager in the shamba in the village, go and do this thing. It doesn't work. You've got to be dedicated in this business, or else don't do farming. Do other things around it. Input supplies, farm mechanization. Nowadays the big subject now is tractors. So the government is now pushing for a huge increase in tractor mechanization. So they're working with India for a $250 million credit line so that we can bring in tractors from India or general machinery into the country. And the idea is to have tractors at every single county in this country. So India and Kenya are working quite closely in getting this financing done. So if that level of investment comes in, every single village will have a tractor. It'll be a game changer. India alone, Ashif, produces 1 million tractors a year itself as a domestic industry. It's the world's largest producer of tractors in the world, right? Phenomenal. You go to any village in India, it's like you owning a Mercedes in Nairobi. A farmer owning a tractor is like his center of attraction. It's so prestigious, but the government has worked around it. Give you cheap financing, will give you implements on that one. There's enough diesel or whatever in the system. They've done it really cleverly, but they've nurtured it. How they've nurtured the fertilizer industry and the seed industry in this country, we're working with government quite close to say to them, mechanization should be the next priority for them. Get tractors in every single village. It can't happen without government support. It's an expensive product. But I know that if this India money comes in, it's going to be a game changer.
This is just a wild idea. For the private sector to create a collective investment scheme type of fund, a long-term fund with a 20-year exit, with a proper valuation at each stage. Would something like that work, for people who want to invest in this sector, but you have experts who run that output, but everybody knows that this is a long-term project? Because collecting 20, 30 billion shillings for a very sophisticated development with what you're saying, or consolidating farms and bringing them together, as part of a bigger scheme, would something like that work? Or is it too political?
Okay, if you look pure business, it would work. Shiv, I'll be honest with you. I mean, that's serious capital. And if you look at the Malindi project, serious capital is going into that one, and the returns are there. But it's not for a faint-hearted. Meaning, for a business case, you'll get away with it and you'll make a lot of money. But there's other factors around it, right? County governments want to be involved. Everybody wants their own slice of the cake. But politics is involved. So, there's other factors which are not agriculture only. It's a general climate of revenue collection and all that. So, but there are serious investors in this market, and they're looking at this in the same way you just said it. And I've come across 2 or 3 big people from overseas have come into it. The French team were here last week with the president. They're all looking at that sort of money. PE companies are looking at us. We've talked to them every single day. They have money which is unlimited. Do you want $50 million, $100 million? You want it? We have it. Comes a little price. but the profit margin is justified. But then getting this sort of project going is hard work, one, and two, keeping certain vested interests out of this is also quite hard work.
My own sense, PE will not work because they have a short-term 7-year horizon. They want a, 20% plus IRR, and, they want to grow very fast. I think this needs patient capital, which is long-term, and people who are investing are going there with that mindset, and, looking at it that, long-term, 15, 20 years down the road, this is the returns we will get once this thing is fully working.
Correct.
And for the government, what do you think is, one or two things that the government still needs to do to drive and bring the private sector in, or is it doing enough at this stage?
One bit more coordination with the regulators. We have a real big issue going on at the moment. Suddenly in the last 12 months, we've had maybe 15 or 20 different types of taxes put into the system. Every regulator has now put in a lot more taxes in the system, and a lot more paperwork has gone in. Again, a little bit more deregulation is important. I think they've gone a little overboard. The private sector saying we don't mind paying the regulators, but keep it within reason. Some of the regulators are now charging 1% of sales or 2% of sales. It's a phenomenal amount of money. So that's a straight tax. So we're telling, when we speak to government quite a lot, if it's 0.2%, 1%, or a flat rate per kilo, which they were doing it years ago, that would be a more sensible approach. And the problem with these taxes comes with paperwork. So, for instance, if you go to a county, there's a cess tax. I don't know if you know cess tax, but every time a truck of tomatoes goes from one county to the other, there's per kilo, there's a tax that between counties they charge. So by the time, let's say from Mombasa, or let's say from Kisumu going down to Nairobi, they have to pay maybe 6 types of cess at each stage. So the driver has to collect cash every single time and pay cash. And some of it is receipted, some of it is not receipted, but the truck stops. Sometimes they open a refrigerated truck just to count how many boxes are flowers in that truck. How do you function, right? So we've spent a lot of time as ASNET, and we've done a whole study, and we're pushing government to say, first, standardize the taxes. Nobody minds paying taxes when you're standard. But give us, say, we will pay 20 shillings per kilo of tomatoes at every stage, and we'll do it by M-Pesa. Nobody minds that, right? Because we understand counties need revenue. We're doing it in a systematic, organized fashion, and we've been working quite a lot closely with the president's the PETS team. We worked a lot with IMF and World Bank on trying to figure this whole system out. So a little bit of deregulation or less regulation, I think that's quite important, especially over the last year. Secondly, I mentioned about mechanization program. It does need central capital, central government pushing. And third one, which is a government is doing a good job in, is opening the export markets up for us. China was an amazing example for us. So avocado is going to China, for instance. We've got, hopefully in the next 1 or 2 or 3 months' time, now that there's a problem with the paperwork still between the customs, if they can resolve the paperwork issue, we are going to be exporting container loads of avocados to China, duty-free and quota-free. Amazing. We've just started negotiating with the Indians on a free trade agreement. A little bit more difficult because they're also agro-based nation, and we're trying to find a common ground between us by saying, when the off-season, can they take Kenyan avocados, for instance, and find a mechanism of having off-peak, on-peak times. India wants fresh flowers. How many Indian weddings are happening every day in India? They love Kenyan flowers. At the moment, the biggest exporter of Kenyan roses is an Indian company, right? Black Tulip. They're massive. They own 7 farms in this country. So we're telling the Indian government, your biggest investors in Kenya on the floriculture sector are Indian companies, but they themselves can't export into India. So, we have a good case there. And of course, finally, the big one for us is the Africa Free Trade Agreement is very important to us. You won't believe, Ashif, we're now selling Kenyan tea bags into Ghana, for instance. I was in Ghana a month ago, and I saw Kenyan tea bags, specialized tea bags, green tea, whatever, made by Kenyan factories sitting on the Ghana shelves. So if you know, in the total exports of Kenyan exports in the Africa market generally, including Tanzania and Uganda, is about 60%, 50-60% of our produce is now going into Africa. And if we get that right, I think that's going to be a massive new market for us.
So in terms of your final conclusions, your parting shot, for people who really are looking at this sector that's not moving, vis-a-vis where you see and where you sit, and what is your conclusion on the agriculture sector?
So if you imagine last 3 years, agriculture has been really a good sector. It's been a driver in this economy. If you look at COVID, the best year we've ever had in agriculture was in COVID. So part of that was because of good rainfall, but also because I think the deregulation, the liberalization, the privatization by government has been very good for the sector. It just needs handholding. The historical political pressure was too much in the olden days. Now, I think this new president understood the value of agriculture. He's brought in a very good minister in Kagwe. So I think so far, I think it's in the right space. We have very little to complain about. It looks positive. As long as the government stays the course, I think we're in for much better times in agriculture than we were in the past.
Thank you, Dr. Bimal, for joining us today and for sharing your wisdom and insights in this sector, which is really a key driver of the Kenya economy and the East African economy. But also the other, apart from this is whatever you've said, are similar principles that other East African countries can adopt. Because if you all adopt the same principles, then we will have a much bigger agricultural land available, and then you grow what is good for your country, let somebody else grow what is good for there, and then we have a good exchange of those goods within our side without having to rely on exports of agriculture or some of these areas. So thank you very much, and thank you for making it.
Thank you, Ashif. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you all for being here today. Don't forget to share, like, and share your comments with us, and hope to see you on our 4th episode, which will be around the stock exchange and raising of equity and other types of finance within this economy.